Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to listen very carefully because what I'm about to say is not just about economics, not just about politics, but about survival, our survival. America today is standing on the edge of a cliff, and one reckless move could push us into a catastrophe that reshapes the entire world. The talk of an attack on Iran is not just saber rattling, it's a spark that could ignite a firestorm. And if that firestorm spreads, it won't just be another regional conflict, it could escalate into World War III. Every war has a cost, and that cost is never carried by the politicians who push for it, nor by the corporations that lobby for it. The cost is always paid by the people, by you, by me, by the millions of ordinary citizens who are told that this is for their protection, for their freedom, for their security. But history shows us something very different. The price of war is paid in the form of higher taxes, skyrocketing inflation, devalued currencies, and lives disrupted or destroyed. Every missile fired, every plane launched, every soldier deployed is funded not by the empty words of leaders, but by the money drained from the pockets of the public. And here is the hard truth. When America decides to attack a nation like Iran, the economic shockwaves do not stay confined to that region. They spread across the globe, destabilizing markets, spiking energy prices, and raising the cost of living for every family trying to make ends meet. When oil prices surge because conflict threatens the Middle East, who suffers first? Not the political elite sitting comfortably in Washington, not the CEOs of defense companies cashing in record profits. It's the average worker filling up their gas tank, struggling to afford heating bills, paying more for groceries that are transported across thousands of miles. It's the saver who thought their dollar would hold value only to watch inflation eat away at everything they've built. War is sold as a patriotic duty, but in reality, it is an economic trap that drains wealth from the bottom and funnels it upward to those who already have more than enough. That is why you must always question who is really benefiting. When leaders tell you we need to act for national security, the question you must ask yourself is security for whom? Every empire in history, from Rome to Britain, has followed the same pattern. They expanded, they overreached, they spent more on military campaigns than their treasuries could sustain. At first, people cheered, believing that conquest meant strength. But over time, the real cost was revealed. Economies crumbled, currencies collapsed, and societies fractured under the unbearable weight of endless wars. Do we really believe America will somehow be the exception? Do we believe we can drown ourselves in debt, print endless dollars, and wage conflicts overseas without consequences at home? That is a dangerous illusion. The burden of war always lands on those least prepared to carry it. The single mother who watches her grocery bill double, the retiree whose savings suddenly lose value, the small business owner struggling with higher costs of goods and lower consumer demand. While Wall Street may find a way to profit off defense contracts and market volatility, Main Street is left with the wreckage. And yet, here lies an opportunity to wake up, to refuse to be silent, to demand accountability from those who would casually push us into another costly conflict. Because if the people do not stand against this cycle, it will repeat again and again until nothing is left to stand on. Now, I want you to imagine the future. If America goes down this path, if another war drains our already fragile economy, what happens to the dollar? What happens to your savings, your retirement, your children's future? Inflation will not simply tick higher, it will surge. The cost of borrowing will rise. Global trust in our financial system will erode. And once trust is lost, it is nearly impossible to regain. That is the silent but devastating cost of war, the erosion of confidence, the loss of stability, the destruction of the economic foundation that supports millions of lives. But here is the motivational truth: you are not powerless. While leaders may gamble recklessly, you can prepare wisely. You can refuse to be manipulated by patriotic slogans and media narratives designed to distract from the economic reality. You can take control of your finances, invest in real assets, and protect your wealth from the storm that wars inevitably bring. You can raise your voice, question authority, and refuse to be complicit in a system that sacrifices the many for the gain of the few. The price of war may be paid by the people, but the resistance to war can also come from the people. And if enough of us understand this truth, if enough of us say, not again, not in our name, not with our future, then the cycle can be broken. That is the challenge before us. That is the call to action. Will you be the one who pays the price quietly, or will you be the one who dares to stand, to question, to prepare, and to lead by example? Because history has already written the story of empires destroyed by their own wars. The only question is whether we will learn from it or repeat it. The choice, as always, rests not in the hands of the few, but in the courage of the many. Empires never fall in a single night, and they never collapse because of a single defeat on the battlefield. They fall when their ambitions outrun their resources, when their governments choose military overreach instead of economic stability, when their leaders believe they can defy the simple rules of arithmetic by spending what they do not have and borrowing what they can never repay. America today is walking that very path, already drowning in debt, already dependent on the printing press to sustain an illusion of prosperity. Our leaders flirt with the idea of launching another costly war in the Middle East. An attack on Iran would not just be a geopolitical gamble, it would be an economic suicide note. Wars drain treasuries, they destabilize currencies, and they destroy the confidence that holds financial systems together. History has shown this time and again, and yet we behave as though we are immune. But let me ask you, what makes us think America will be the first empire in history to escape the consequences of military overreach? Rome believed its conquests could pay for themselves until the cost of maintaining legions across vast territories bankrupted its coffers. Britain believed it could expand its empire endlessly until its debt burden forced it into decline and left the pound stripped of its dominance. Even the Soviet Union, with all its military might, collapsed not because it lost on the battlefield, but because its economy could not sustain the cost of endless competition with the West. And here is the hook. America is following the same script, but this time the stakes are even higher. We are the most indebted nation in the history of the world. We finance our wars not with savings, but with borrowed money. We pay for our military adventures by printing dollars and selling treasury bonds to creditors who are growing increasingly wary of our excesses. At some point, they will stop buying into the illusion. And when that moment comes, the consequences will be brutal. Think carefully about the mechanics of this. Every dollar spent on war is a dollar not spent on building roads, schools, hospitals, or infrastructure that actually strengthens an economy. Every bomb dropped is not just a weapon. It is a transfer of wealth siphoned away from productive investment and into destruction. You cannot bomb your way to prosperity. You cannot fight your way to fiscal health. You cannot print your way to endless strength. Yet that is the illusion we are fed, that America is strong enough, rich enough, powerful enough to carry the burden of perpetual war. But numbers do not lie. The debt grows larger, the deficits deepen, the dollar weakens, and the faith in our system erodes. Economic collapse is not sudden. It creeps up slowly until one day it feels like it struck all at once. The signs are already here. Inflation is eating away at the purchasing power of the middle class. Interest on the national debt is consuming a growing share of government revenues. Global trust in the dollar is slipping, with rival nations building systems to trade without it. Add a major war with Iran to this picture, and the fragile structure holding our economy together will begin to crack. Energy prices would skyrocket, deficits would explode, and the dollar, already questioned, could face a crisis of confidence that ends its role as the world's reserve currency. Imagine what that means for every American household. Prices would rise not by 10 or 20%, but by multiples. Savings would be wiped out. Retirement accounts would be gutted. The American standard of living, long taken for granted, would collapse under the weight of decisions made recklessly in the halls of power. But here lies the hook that should shake you awake. The collapse of empires always begins with the belief that they are too great to fall. America has convinced itself that it is exceptional, that the rules of economics somehow bend in our favor, that deficits don't matter, that debt can be ignored, that the dollar will always be king, that arrogance is the final stage before decline. Because reality is indifferent to pride. Markets do not care about slogans. Creditors do not accept excuses, and history does not forgive those who repeat the mistakes of the past. Yet, within this dark truth, there's also an opportunity. Collapse is not inevitable if people demand change before it's too late. Overreach can be halted if citizens refuse to allow reckless wars to define their future. Individuals can prepare, protect, and adapt if they refuse to believe the comforting lies of politicians and instead face the reality with courage. The hook here is simple. You have a choice. You can sit idle, believing the empire is unshakable, or you can take action to shield yourself and your family from what is coming. Because if history teaches us anything, it is this: when nations overreach, when they drown themselves in debt and chase wars abroad, collapse follows. The only question is whether you will be caught unprepared in its wreckage, or whether you will rise above it by seeing the truth before the rest. Fear is one of the oldest tools of control, and governments know how to wield it with surgical precision. When leaders cannot justify their actions with logic, when the economic numbers no longer add up, when the promises of prosperity sound hollow, they fall back on fear. They tell you there is a threat, an enemy, a danger lurking beyond your borders, and unless you surrender your questions and your doubts, catastrophe awaits. Fear becomes the weapon that silences debate, blinds judgment, and convinces citizens to accept policies that in calmer times they would never tolerate. And that is why we must recognize how fear operates, especially when talk of war with Iran grows louder. The narrative is simple: attack or be attacked, strike first or suffer later, follow blindly or risk annihilation. But here is the hook: when fear dictates policy, truth becomes the first casualty, and the people become the ultimate victims. Ask yourself this: who benefits from a frightened population? It isn't the family struggling with higher food prices. It isn't the small business owner crushed by inflation. It isn't the young graduate buried under student debt, wondering how to build a future. No, fear benefits those who already hold power, those who profit when dissent is silenced, those who know that as long as the people are distracted by threats abroad, they won't notice the economic rot spreading at home. Leaders know that when citizens are scared, They stop asking about deficits. They stop questioning reckless spending, and they stop holding the powerful accountable. Fear is the smokescreen that hides the deeper crisis. And here lies the dangerous cycle. The more the system weakens, the more fear is manufactured to keep it intact. An attack on Iran, framed as necessary for national security, would be sold with the same rhetoric we've heard countless times before. We were told Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. We were told Afghanistan would bring democracy to the Middle East. We were told each war was essential, urgent, and unavoidable. And every time fear was the sales pitch, every time the truth emerged too late, after the damage had been done, after the lives had been lost, after the economy had already paid the price. Do we really want to repeat that cycle again, knowing full well how it ends? Fear is powerful, but only if we allow it to rule us. The antidote to fear is knowledge. When you question, when you demand evidence, when you refuse to accept slogans in place of facts, the spell of fear begins to break. And once broken, leaders lose their grip, because here is what they fear most: not Iran, not foreign powers, not economic collapse. They fear an informed citizenry that will no longer be manipulated. Imagine the shift if millions refused to be cowed into silence, if millions refused to believe every headline designed to terrify, if millions stood firm and said, "We will not sacrifice truth for the illusion of safety." That is real power, and it rests with the people, not the politicians. Consider how differently you live when fear controls you. You hesitate, you shrink, you surrender opportunities. Nations are no different. A nation consumed by fear becomes reactive, impulsive, reckless. But a nation guided by courage, by reason, by truth, makes decisions that strengthen rather than weaken it. Which America do we want to live in? The one forever manipulated by fear into fighting wars that drain us, or the one that breaks free from that cycle and rebuilds on honesty and resilience? Fear can only imprison you if you accept the chains. You have the power to resist. You have the power to say no to manipulation, to see through the propaganda, to challenge the narrative. And once you do, fear loses its grip and freedom begins to return. The question is not whether the government will try to control you with fear. That much is certain. The question is whether you will rise above it, whether you will demand the truth, whether you will have the courage to think for yourself when so many simply follow. Because fear is contagious, but so is courage. And if you choose courage, you inspire others to do the same. That is how movements begin, how change is born, how the cycle of fear is broken. In every period of crisis, wealth is not destroyed, it is transferred. It moves from the unprepared to the prepared, from those who ignored the warning signs to those who took them seriously. That is why protecting your wealth before the storm hits is not just smart, it is essential. When nations march toward unnecessary wars, when governments pile debt upon debt, when central banks inflate currencies to cover the costs, ordinary people are left exposed. Their savings shrink, their wages buy less, and their hopes for financial security crumble. But those who see what is coming, those who understand the true nature of money and markets, are not merely victims. They become survivors, and often they become stronger. Here is the hook. The greatest fortunes in history were made not in times of calm, but in times of chaos, when the majority panicked and a few had prepared. Imagine what happens if America launches an attack on Iran. Oil prices spike overnight, pushing energy costs higher for every household. Inflation surges as transportation and production costs ripple through the entire economy. Stock markets tumble in fear of prolonged instability, while the dollar, already weak, faces even greater pressure. To the unprepared, this is devastation. But to the prepared, it is an opportunity to shield wealth, to preserve purchasing power, and to position themselves for the rebound that always follows crisis. Preparation is not pessimism, it is realism. It is the difference between being crushed by events or rising above them. But preparation requires courage. It requires stepping away from the herd, refusing to believe the comforting lie that everything will be fine. Politicians will always tell you that the economy is strong, that inflation is temporary, that the dollar is safe. They have to say that because their power depends on your compliance. But look beyond the slogans and into the numbers. Look at the debt soaring past levels never before seen in human history. Look at the inflation that eats into every paycheck. Look at the loss of faith in the U.S. currency abroad. These are not signs of strength. They are warnings of weakness. And when weakness is met with the shock of war, the impact will be catastrophic for those who ignored the signals. The hook is this: protection is not about fear, it is about freedom. When you secure your wealth, when you diversify into assets that hold real value, when you refuse to put all your trust in a government that has shown time and, again, its willingness to sacrifice your future for its own gain, you free yourself from dependence. You are no longer at the mercy of reckless policies. You gain the power to make decisions on your own terms, to withstand the storm without being broken by it. That is true empowerment, and it is available to anyone willing to act before it is too late. Think about the alternative: those who wait, those who trust blindly, those who assume tomorrow will look like yesterday. They are always the ones who lose the most. They watch their savings evaporate in a wave of inflation. They see their retirements cut in half when markets crash. They find themselves scrambling in panic when shortages hit, when prices rise, when the system falters. By the time they wake up, it is too late. But those who prepare are never surprised. They may feel the turbulence, but they do not lose everything. They stand steady while others fall. This is why protecting your wealth is not just about money. It is about dignity, security, and the ability to choose your own path. When crises come, and they always come, the unprepared are forced into desperation, while the prepared are free to act with clarity. And that freedom, that ability to stand firm while the world shakes, is the greatest reward of all. Ask yourself, will you be one of those left scrambling, or will you be one of those standing strong, ready, and unshaken? Because the storm is coming, and when it hits, it will not wait for you to decide. Every war begins with a story, and that story is almost always a lie. It is dressed up in the language of patriotism, wrapped in the flag, and sold to the public as an urgent necessity. The people are told that there is no time for questions, no room for doubt, no space for debate. But the truth is that wars are not waged for the noble reasons advertised. They are waged for power, profit, and control. When America contemplates an attack on Iran, you will be told it is about protecting freedom, about defending democracy, about keeping the world safe. Yet if you peel back the rhetoric, you see something very different. You see special interests lobbying for resources, defense contractors salivating over new contracts, and politicians eager to appear strong while distracting the public from domestic failures. Here is the hook. Propaganda is not about convincing you of the truth. It is about convincing you to stop asking questions. Think about the pattern we have already lived through. We were told Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. There were none. We were told Afghanistan would be a quick mission to dismantle terror networks. It lasted 2 decades. We were told Libya needed intervention to protect civilians. The result was chaos and a failed state. In each case, the narrative was clear, urgent, and absolute. And in each case, it fell apart once the damage was done. Do you see the danger? The cost of believing propaganda is not measured in headlines or speeches. It is measured in lives lost, in economies shattered, in trust destroyed. When you accept the story without demanding the facts, you hand over your power to those who profit from your silence. Truth does not fear questions, but lies do. If the reasons for war are solid, they will withstand scrutiny. If the evidence is real, it will hold up under challenge. But if the narrative collapses the moment you start asking who benefits, you can be certain it was propaganda all along. And yet, too often, the people are made to feel unpatriotic for questioning, disloyal for doubting, cowardly for resisting. That is the design. Silence the skeptics, marginalize the critics, and push the nation into conflict before the truth can catch up. But here is where you have power. By demanding truth instead of propaganda, by refusing to accept vague assurances and empty slogans, you strip fear of its strength. You reclaim your role as a citizen rather than a spectator. You become the barrier that stands between reckless leaders and another unnecessary war. Imagine the difference if millions of people asked the simple question, who gains from this conflict? Would the push for war survive if the public refused to be manipulated? Would politicians be so quick to act if they knew every justification would be dissected and challenged by an alert and informed citizenry? The truth is they rely on your silence. They rely on your willingness to be distracted. They rely on your trust. And once that trust is gone, their power weakens. This is why demanding truth is not just a moral act. It is an act of protection, protection for your family, your wealth, your future. Because propaganda does not only lead to war, it leads to economic collapse, to higher prices, to lost savings, to shattered stability. When you allow yourself to be deceived, you pay the price in every grocery bill, every tax increase, every devalued dollar. Refusing propaganda is not just about peace abroad, it is about prosperity at home. And that prosperity begins with the courage to ask show me the facts, show me the evidence, show me the truth. You are not powerless against propaganda. You are not condemned to be missiled. You have the ability to seek truth, to share it, to expose the lies before they harden into policy. And when enough people do this, the narrative collapses. Wars require consent, and consent requires belief. If the belief dies, the war never begins. That is the real power of truth. It is a shield, a weapon, and a form of resistance stronger than any bomb or bullet. The question is, will you choose to wield it? Or will you allow the story to be written for you, no matter the cost? Because history is full of examples of nations that paid dearly for believing lies. The choice this time is ours. The most powerful decision a nation can make is not to unleash its weapons, but to restrain them. It is far easier to start a war than it is to build a lasting peace, but it is peace that creates the conditions for prosperity, stability, and genuine security. Choosing peace is not weakness, it is wisdom. And yet, when America contemplates an attack on Iran, the conversation is framed as though war is strength and peace is surrender. That is the dangerous illusion. War consumes, war drains, war destroys. Peace, on the other hand, allows economies to grow, families to thrive, and nations to prosper. Here is the hook that must not be ignored. Every bomb dropped is money burned. Every missile launched is opportunity lost. And every war fought is a future mortgaged. Look around at the challenges America already faces. The nation is drowning in debt. Households are strained by inflation. Infrastructure crumbles and education lags. Can we really afford another costly conflict? Do we truly believe that pouring billions, even trillions, into another war halfway across the world will make our lives better here at home? The truth is that war robs us twice. It robs us directly through the immediate costs of fighting, contracts, deployments, weapon systems, and it robs us indirectly by diverting resources away from the investments that actually strengthen a nation. Every dollar spent on destruction is a dollar not spent on innovation, on rebuilding, on creating opportunity for future generations. The hook is simple. The path of peace is not only morally superior, it is economically superior. History makes this clear. Nations that embrace endless conflict decay from within, while those that turn their focus inward, investing in their people and their economies, grow stronger. Rome built an empire, but collapsed under the weight of its legions. Britain conquered continents, but weakened itself in the process. Even the Soviet Union, with its massive arsenal, collapsed not from defeat in war, but from the economic exhaustion of competing endlessly with the West. America faces the same choice now. Will we chase the illusion of power through conflict, or will we rebuild strength through peace? The hook here is undeniable. True strength is not found in how many wars you can start, but in how many you can avoid. And let us not forget the human side of this. Peace means parents who do not have to send their children into battles fought for reasons they barely understand. Peace means communities that are not shattered by the return of broken soldiers. Peace means young people building futures instead of burying their hopes under the weight of endless wars. It is easy for politicians in Washington to speak casually about military options. They do not pay the personal cost. The cost is borne by the people, by those who fight, by those who grieve, by those who struggle with the aftermath long after the headlines have faded. Choosing peace is not just a matter of policy, it is a matter of humanity. But here is the motivational truth. Choosing peace does not mean doing nothing. It means standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept war as the default answer. It means demanding leaders pursue diplomacy, demanding accountability for reckless rhetoric, demanding that the trillions wasted on destruction be invested in creation instead. It means taking control of the narrative and insisting that peace is not weakness, that prosperity is not built through bombs, that security is not achieved through endless conflict. The hook that should inspire you is this: peace is not passive. It is powerful, and it is active resistance against those who profit from war. Imagine an America that chooses peace. Imagine an economy no longer burdened by endless wars, free to innovate, to grow, to create wealth that is real and lasting. Imagine communities revitalized, infrastructure rebuilt, education funded, and opportunities expanded. That is the America possible when we turn away from conflict and toward prosperity. The choice is in front of us, but it requires courage, the courage to resist fear, to resist propaganda, to resist the easy rhetoric of war. It requires the strength to demand a better path, not only for ourselves, but for generations to come. Because at the end of the day, the greatest investment we can make is not in weapons that destroy, but in peace that endures. And that choice, though difficult, is the only one that can secure both our prosperity and our future.